Welcome to Module 5. In this module, we will look at potential barriers to and enablers of reliance. By the end of this module, you will be able to identify challenges and opportunities for reliance. There are a number of potential barriers to the implementation of reliance. These include lack of political will, lack of accessible information and confidentiality of information, and other considerations such as language, differences in country-specific regulatory requirements, lack of regulatory alignment of product risk classifications. Let's look at these in more detail. A lack of political will and government support can make it difficult for NRAs to implement or facilitate reliance in their daily practice, even if a legal basis is established that supports reliance, and if NRAs support reliance as a strategy and approach. Reliance should be anchored at the highest level in the government policy, and the relevant support should be given to NRAs to implement reliance approaches. A lack of access to complete assessments of reference regulatory authorities can be a major barrier to effective reliance. Reference regulatory authorities should make their assessments and other regulatory information publicly available where possible. Manufacturers are invited to share the full assessment reports from a reference regulatory authority, pending the relevant authorization if required, to authorities that want to use reliance approaches. Sensitive, non-public information in unredacted assessment or inspection reports can be shared between regulatory authorities upon request. In some circumstances, the sharing of such information may require the consent of the manufacturer. Other potential barriers include a lack of a common language and difficulties in or the cost of translation, differences in national regulatory requirements and evidentiary standards, a lack of regulatory alignment of product risk classifications, inconsistent practices regarding modifications to medical devices, including in vitro diagnostics, a lack of acceptance of foreign clinical data and real-world evidence, the level of detail in regulatory reports, different levels of competence, internal resistance, and insufficient knowledge of the reference regulatory authority and how it operates. All the presented challenges and barriers should be addressed and mitigated by setting up the appropriate processes and strategy for reliance. Each NRA should develop their own reliance policy as per a risk-based approach. The implementation of reliance approaches can be facilitated by trust, convergence and harmonization, information sharing and dialogue among regulators, economic or legal integration, and engagement of stakeholders. Reliance requires the confidence that the regulatory outcome is based on strong regulatory processes and standards, and is, therefore, trustworthy. Initiatives to foster trust among regulatory authorities are essential. Trust develops with increasing familiarity and understanding of what is behind regulatory outputs. Confidence can be built by sharing information, including the standards applied to regulatory decisions, and working together and learning each other's ways of working. Trust can be built in phases, starting with exchange of assessment reports and moving to work sharing or joint assessments. Regulatory authorities may consider initiating reliance processes with applications for medical products of lower risk. Convergence and harmonization of requirements, standards, and guidelines are important enablers of regulatory cooperation and reliance. The more similar requirements, standards, and guidelines are, the greater the opportunity for collaboration and reliance. Differences in standards and practices, however, do not prevent one authority from relying on another, particularly when the relying authority has limited capacity and expertise. As a matter of good practice, NRAs should rely on assessments or decisions from reference regulatory authorities that apply international standards and guidelines. Information sharing is an essential part of reliance, and NRAs are encouraged to share information and good practices with other NRAs. Increasing dialogue among regulators is seen in the growing number of international initiatives, such as the International Pharmaceutical Regulators Program and regional networks for sharing regulatory information. When there is economic or legal integration in a region or a group of countries, reliance is facilitated and strengthened by the existing mutual provisions. For example, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the European Union, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Pacific Alliance, the Regional Economic Communities in Africa, and the Southern Common Market, Mercosur. All relevant stakeholders should be engaged and informed in order to increase their understanding and acceptance of reliance approaches and the clear benefits they present for all parties. Communication and engagement with stakeholders should be tailored to each target audience. You have now completed Module 5. This is the final module in this course.